Next Chapter Podcasts.
This episode is brought to you by Indeed. Stop waiting around for the perfect candidate. Instead, use Indeed sponsored jobs to find the right people with the right skills fast. It's a simple way to make sure your listing is the first candidates see. According to Indeed data, sponsored jobs have 4 times more applicants than non-sponsored jobs. So go build your dream team today with Indeed. Get a $75 sponsored job credit at Indeed.com/podcast. Terms and conditions apply.
It's the Paradise Podcast.
I am your host, Ryan Michelle Bethay, with my husband, Sterling.
What's up?
Join us here on Hulu and Hulu on Disney Plus, where we'll discuss each episode with the cast and crew of Paradise. I'll be getting all the secrets from Dan Fogelman, James Marsden, Shailene Woodley, Julianne Nicholson, and Sterling Kelby-Brown. Woo! Paradise, the official podcast, is now streaming.
And stream Paradise on Hulu and Hulu on Disney Plus.
As we approach this history, we have work to do in this state to build those bridges within this state, to reach across with those that didn't vote for us, to try to find that common ground. I'm pledging to do that tonight, but I will tell you, tonight is a night for rejoicing because, as Dr. King liked to quote, the moral arc of the universe is long, but it bends toward justice.
Well, you know what I'm saying? It's like we got a demo tape and nobody want to hear it, but it's like this is South got something to say.
Welcome to Our New South, a podcast series presented by Levine Museum of the New South in Charlotte, North Carolina. Levine Museum connects the past to the future to realize the promises of a New South. To learn more and donate to projects like this, visit museumoftheNewSouth.org. Hi, my name is Kevin Blackistone, sports columnist at the Washington Post, coming to you from College Park, Maryland, where I teach journalism at the University of Maryland.
And I'm Dr. Robert Greene II. I'm an associate professor of history at Claflin University in Orangeburg, South Carolina.
On season 3 of the podcast, we're welcoming 10 influential Southerners to share insights from their lives and careers, as well as their thoughts on the New South and its future.
We thank you for joining us on this journey and for making the show a Signal Award, Communicator Award, and Anthem Award winner.
Follow the show, rate and review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and for the first time, we're now publishing portions of our interviews on YouTube.
Go to youtube.com and search Levine Museum.
Okay, let's get to today's episode of the show.
South got something to say.
This week, we bring you a truly special episode of Our New South. This past February, we stepped onto the stage at Charlotte's beautiful historic Carolina Theater for our first ever live podcast recording. And for this milestone, we had the privilege of being joined by former United States Senator Doug Jones.
Proudly hosted by the Levine Museum of the New South, this incredible event gave us the opportunity to engage with a live audience as we explored critical topics like the pursuit of justice, the true power of bipartisanship, and the ongoing fight for equality in the heart of the South. But before we get to the conversation, it's time to test our listeners' knowledge of the South with a trivia question.
You know the rules. It's multiple choice trivia on Southern history, and I will share the correct answer at the end of the episode.
Okay, what do we have for the listeners today?
In the Civil Rights era, who is considered the first New South governor? A. Reuben Askew of Florida. B. Bill Waller of Mississippi. C. Terry Sanford of North Carolina. Or D. George Wallace of Alabama.
Stay tuned to the end of the show for the answer. But before we get to our guest, I would like to ask Dr. Robert Greene II to provide us with some historical context to set the stage for our conversation.
For the August 1971 issue of Ebony magazine, the publisher and editors decided to devote an entire issue to the South today. Taking stock of how much had changed in the region since the passage of the 1964 Civil Rights Act and the 1965 Voting Rights Act, publisher John H. Johnson wrote, quote, "Many Blacks are looking backward to the land of their birth. They are wondering what the South is really like today," end quote. In response, Ebony editor and historian Lerone Bennett Jr. argued that it was, quote, "impossible to appraise the possibilities of the New South of today without remembering the failures of the New Souths of yesterday." This was the New South that Alabamaman Doug Jones came of age in, experiencing both the triumphs of and backlash to the civil rights movement. Jones' career as a lawyer and a politician were shaped by the campaign against segregation in his home state. Grappling with handfuls of successes and the many bushels of failure of the New Souths of the past and present fell to a generation of Southerners who came of age during and after the heyday of the civil rights movement. Some of these Southerners, such as Georgian Julian Bond and Alabamaman John Lewis, took their experiences in the civil rights movement and tried to transform the political arena with them. The politics of the region have been transformed by the Civil Rights and especially Voting Rights Acts, the latter adding millions of new voters, all Black, to the voting rolls of Southern states. It was clear that white Southern politicians could no longer openly race-bait as they had in the past. Instead, victory in November will require appeals to different racial and ethnic groups in the region. This caused the rise of New South Democrats, men and women who embraced a new, more inclusive vision of the Southern wing of the party. Long known for their fealty to white supremacy since the 19th century, Southern Democrats would now attempt to win critical Black voters, while struggling to hold on to white Southerners who began migrating to a more conservative Republican Party. Such New South Democrats included governors such as John C. West of South Carolina or Bill Clinton of Arkansas. Perhaps the most famous New South Democrat of the 1970s, however, was Georgia Governor Jimmy Carter, who proclaimed in his 1971 inaugural address, "I say to you quite frankly that the time for racial discrimination is over." 6 years later, Carter would give another inaugural address as President of the United States. All of these leaders, whether on the local, state, or national levels, pushed to transform both the reality and the image of the South after the Civil Rights Movement. Whether it was a Jesse Jackson bringing to life a Rainbow Coalition, or a Barbara Jordan vowing to make the promises of the Constitution real, Southerners who came of age during and after the Civil Rights era played a crucial role in the founding of today's New South. Doug Jones is another such leader, whose career is driven by New South ideals of tolerance, racial diversity, and justice for all.
And now, live from the Carolina Theater in Charlotte, North Carolina, a very special episode of Our New South.
We made it. Yeah, here we are here in Charlotte, North Carolina. We are very happy to be here this evening. We've been doing this podcast for several years now, and this is our first live recording. And we are really honored and thrilled to have a wonderful guest on this evening, Senator Doug Jones. Of course, many of you have probably heard of Doug Jones before, but it's worth noting what his career has been like up to this point. He was born and raised near Birmingham, Alabama, in a steel town, and he pursued the law. He served as U.S. Attorney for the Northern District of Alabama from 1997 to 2001, where he prosecuted very, very important cases, including one against two members of the KKK who were charged with the 1963 16th Street Baptist Church bombing, which killed 4 young girls. He also served as a senator from Alabama from 2018 to 2022. He was the most recent Democratic representative to win statewide office in that state. And of course, right now he's running for governor of Alabama. He's also the writer of the book, Bending Toward Justice, a wonderful read about his time as a lawyer and prosecutor. If you haven't read it, I highly recommend it. And again, on behalf of Kevin, we are very honored and thrilled to welcome to the podcast tonight, Doug Jones.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Now, before we get started, Kevin, you were very gung-ho about getting Doug Jones on the show.
I was.
Tell us a little bit about why you were so excited to have him on the show in the first place.
Yeah, I'd like to kind of hear that
You want to hear
myself.
that? Well, a few years ago, I was in a luncheon at the Civil Rights Museum in Birmingham, Alabama. I was on the board of the Society for Features Journalism, and they had invited a speaker. And this speaker gave a presentation that stuck with me. And one of the reasons it stuck with me was because when the presentation was over, I don't think there was a dry eye in that room. And that presenter was Doug Jones.
I remember that. I remember the group. Absolutely. Thank you. Thanks for having me, guys. It's great to be here in Charlotte. Love Charlotte. And I'm really honored to do this podcast with you guys. I really am.
And we're honored to have you on the podcast. And as always, when we have a guest on, we want to start by learning a bit about your background. So, you were born and raised in Fairfield, Alabama, which is near Birmingham. It's about 10,000 people lived there at the time. Your father worked for U.S. Steel. Your mother was a homemaker. How did your upbringing in Fairfield influence your earliest ideas about being a Southerner living in the South?
Fairfield was not just, it was a suburb of Birmingham. At the time, though, you mentioned my dad working at U.S. Steel. About everybody in my family, all the men worked out at U.S. Steel. It was the biggest employer in the area at the time, probably employed 25,000 people, Fairfield Works. And we lived in a suburb in Fairfield, a brand new suburb. We were the first family to move in 1955. And if you put yourself back in those days, for those of you who can, it was a very segregated world. It was, this community was all white. Fairfield had it was a mixed race community, but that was in different neighborhoods. And so in those times, I had a very protected and sheltered life, like so many. I mean, we didn't have cell phones. We didn't have but 3 TV stations. We didn't have all of the things, and so it was easy to keep kids kind of sheltered from what was going on in the world, and particularly in Alabama, sheltered from all that was going on downtown Birmingham in civil rights. And it was after I started junior high and high school, I think, when our schools became desegregated. And remember, this was years after, a decade after Brown versus Board of Education, that things started to shape me. And I tell folks a lot, you have to put yourself back in those times. And the times were such that those were very tense over school desegregation, which comes apart, by the way, later on in my case. But it was very tense time. And it was the kids in those schools who I think really helped forge a way and a path. And I think that experience, trying to do that in schools that were being desegregated, helped me really see the world in a much different way, coming up in junior high and high school. And of course, going to college at Alabama and then law school, and literally watching the first church bombing case. And I had a lot of mentors on the way. A lot of mentors that regardless of what was going on, everybody, including my dad, who was a supervisor ultimately at U.S. Steel, was treating everybody, regardless of who they were, with the dignity and respect they deserve.
Absolutely. And, to add on to that, I want to ask a follow-up question, because I think it's important for folks to understand that while for most Americans now, the civil rights movement is something they see in textbooks, they see in documentaries and movies and such, but I always tell my students it wasn't that long ago. Correct. My parents grew up during the civil rights movement as well, and you've written extensively about growing up during that time period. How did the movement in Alabama specifically influence you in terms of your worldview and your career in the law?
Yeah, it's interesting because some of it influenced me after the fact. My upbringing was far different than the black kids in downtown Birmingham who were marching in Birmingham. And so the influence was basically coming of age and seeing and reading and understanding what happened just 10 miles down the road from your house that you didn't know that much about, and knowing that why would that need to happen this way? And so it was a really coming of age as I developed as a teenager into college. That's how it was. But again, I think the most important thing for me and was my family and the mentors that I had, school principals and superintendents, people that were part of and lived and grew up in a segregated Jim Crow kind of world, but they weren't the kind of haters, the Klansmen who were burning crosses and bombing churches and those kind of things. It was a community. And when you grow up without that kind of bitterness and hate, I think it's really easier, much, much easier to make sure that you treat everybody the same way. And as things began to change, you don't have to change. You're already there. And it seems to me how I kind of found that and came to that realization. This is me. This is who I am. And so it's a process. It's just like it's growing up every way in a process.
And what you grew up in is really interesting to me historically, right? Because it's been said you grew up in Harper Lee's Alabama, right? To Kill a Mockingbird, right? You were born 13 days before Brown versus Board,
That's right.
which you just mentioned. And
now everybody out there is right now doing the math. Okay, how old is that big dog? Okay.
I was doing that for historical context, right? Not for age.
So I'm 40, just saying, okay?
You're a very mature man with a lot of gravitas. You prosecuted a number of very high-profile cases, like Eric Rudolph, the Centennial Olympic bomber. And for me, and I think for Robert, probably what strikes us the most is your prosecution of Thomas Blanton and Bobby Cherry, the two KKK members who bombed the 16th Street Baptist Church that killed 4 little black girls. How was your life impacted by that case, and why was that case so important for Birmingham, the South, and the rest of the country?
Y'all got a couple of hours? Those are two very, very, very deep questions to talk about. The first piece of this is really about Birmingham and the fact that bombing happened in September 1963. And what people forget that was going on in Birmingham at the time. Birmingham had been a difficult city for the civil rights movement. And the 16th Street Baptist Church was one of the meeting places. It was the place where so many folks came and they had the mass meetings over the years. But in the spring of 1963, in April and May of 1963, that's when the movement that has now become known as the Children's Crusade came to Birmingham. That's when Dr. King went to jail, wrote the famous letter from a Birmingham jail, snuck it out on little pieces of paper. It got published like in August or June or July, long after he'd gotten released. But it was an incredible document. And it was at that point when the leaders of that movement knew that the city was going to resist everything they did. And this was a time when the Jim Crow laws in Birmingham were things like a black man and a white man could not play checkers together in public without getting picked up by the police and sent to jail, because it was a crime, okay? White water fountains, colored water fountains, restrooms, you name it, the whole 9 yards. So the movement came to Birmingham, and Bull Connor, who was the commissioner, had the fire hoses and the dogs. And what really happened at that point was videos reminiscent of what we're seeing today. Videos filmed of the media of those fire hoses and dogs against those kids. They were teenagers and college students. Really shook the conscience of America. I mean, that really shook the conscience of America, shook the conscience of the Congress and the president as President Kennedy started working on a civil rights bill at that point. And then that summer, there were more bombings. There were bombings throughout the black neighborhood. There was bombing of Dr. King's brother's church. There was a bombing at the home of one of our great black lawyers who really was at the forefront of the movement in Birmingham. But significantly, it was school desegregation. 5 days before this bombing, that school desegregation, Birmingham schools were ordered desegregated for the first time. And Birmingham was literally like a powder keg. I don't say that lightly. There was a lot of tension, even though hope had been in the air after the I Have a Dream speech. And so all of that was pending at the time when this bombing occurred. And it never got solved for a long, long time. And so this case just kind of rocked on until 1971, when a young Alabama attorney general named Bill Baxley took over. And he ended up prosecuting the leader of this group named Robert Chambliss, known as Dynamite Bob, thought to have been involved in a lot of the bombings in Birmingham. And as a second-year law student in Birmingham in 1977, I cut classes to go watch that trial. You know, I had been fortunate enough to hang out with a Supreme Court justice one day when he came to Alabama on the 20th anniversary of the Brown versus Board decision. And Justice William O. Douglas gave me some advice. He said, if you want to be a good trial lawyer, go watch trials, go watch lawyers. And I did that with Baxley. Saw an amazing, amazing trial. But what I saw also was an amazing reaction of the conviction of that man and how it helped heal Birmingham, how people celebrated that just 13 years, 14 years after the incident happened, long time, but still in the course of civil rights, not very, very much. And sitting in that and watching that trial, you never, to this day, I can quote you Bill Baxley's closing argument as much, and I'm watching him with the pictures, and it was a very moving argument. And that impacts you, I think, not just as a lawyer wannabe, but as a person, that the law can do good things, that justice means justice regardless. And so when there was this opportunity, and I didn't know about this opportunity when I was becoming U.S. attorney, when all of my nomination was going through, I didn't learn this until like a month before I was sworn in, that the case had been reopened. But it was one that I knew was going to define my tenure as U.S. attorney. Ultimately, what I didn't really fully appreciate was it would define me as a person, as a lawyer, because I could see, I could feel instinctively the communities and their outpouring of relief, of celebration when we finally were successful in those cases. So the short answer is, what did it mean? Everything. To this day, it means everything. To this day, it carried me through an uphill battle for the U.S. Senate that nobody thought we could win. It's going to take me in to the governor's office next year, and y'all are all invited, by the way, okay? I got to tell you, it was that significant. It was that emotional to try to get that accomplished, not just for those families, but for the entire community. And for me, the white kid from Fairfield growing up in a Jim Crow society and moving into that role was just something, it just doesn't get any better.
Well, I got to tell you, when you won office in 2017, defeating Roy Moore, I thought, of course you did. It made sense. It spoke to me that this was advancement, right? That Alabama was moving ahead. And as of 2026, you remain the last Democrat to win and hold a statewide office in Alabama. So what do you feel were the keys to winning that seat in 2017? And what's going to be the key to winning this seat?
Obviously, getting more votes than the other guy is going to be really important for us.
Football guy, score more.
What was important in 2017, it was a special election. And so we were the only election in the entire country at the time. It was a focus on Alabama between my opponent and me, and I won't get into a description about him, but the fact is it got to be a big deal. But that special election let everybody get out of their political corners, and focus not on voting for their team or their tribe, but voting on who they think should best represent the state of Alabama. And it was it was 1.3 million votes cast, and I won by about 22,000. So it wasn't this overwhelming mandate, but it was a win nonetheless. And it was an earthquake kind of win. But the key to that was staying focused on the issues that people care about. And it's the same issues that we're going to focus on this time. It is those kitchen table issues. Healthcare was a big issue. Healthcare cost was a big issue in 2017. Medicaid expansion, all those issues of even affordability. We didn't use that word, but we talked about it. We talked about jobs. We talked about getting workplace. We talked about education. It was literally those kitchen table issues that made people think. We did not get off on tangents. That's the key this year. There's two things about that. 2017 was the first year and Trump won. People were concerned. People said that Alabama gave them hope. My wife and I, when we get recognized, people would say, you gave us hope. And that is a cry for hope that people did. And there's something about what's going on in this country today and in Alabama and other places that I just felt like we needed a voice. I did that in 2017 because certain people needed voices they hadn't had in a long time. I think there's a lot of people in Alabama and across this country need voices now that they're not getting, because they're being, those voices that they would depend on are being silenced for fear of some kind of retribution. Well, we have not fear. There are things just worth fighting for.
You know, and I think that idea of hope is something that a lot of Southerners in particular are holding on to right now, which brings me to a question about your time in the U.S. Senate. So one of my closest friends is originally from North Carolina, and he and I joke about the fact that I now live and work in South Carolina, which he calls the bad Carolina. But you know, there even now in 2026, there are certain perceptions of what the South is and who Southerners are. And did you observe any of that in the U.S. Senate from fellow senators, like ideas about, oh, you're from Alabama, so that means X, Y, or Z?
No, I really didn't.
Really?
You know, I knew that there was probably some of that existed. Probably more in the House than in the Senate, where it's a little bit more of a collegial group. I think in the Senate, there were clearly some of that, and there were certain perceptions. Obviously, most of those perceptions were in my own caucus, where people thought, okay, this is a guy, a Democrat from the South, but he's going to be a Southern Democrat or an Alabama Democrat. And I kept saying, what the hell is that? Okay? I am here in this caucus. But I think it's in part because the Senate is just a different body, or it was. I'm not so sure about that now, to be honest with you. But I think they looked at me as a colleague and were able to work with me. We were able, you know, look, in 3 years, I'm so proud of the record that we had. I was like 25 or 26 pieces of legislation that I was a lead sponsor on with a Republican that got signed into law. I don't know if that's a record or not, but I bet it's close for 3 years, okay? And so folks saw me as somebody that could build some bridges and as a consensus builder. But the South still has some ways to go, because in part, we can't help ourselves. We get in the way of ourselves so many times with embarrassing politicians and embarrassing others that kind of feed the beast of the old stereotypes of the South that I don't say they don't exist anymore. They do, obviously. But fortunately, I didn't feel it all in the U.S. Senate, and that was a good thing.
Well, and thankfully, South Carolina doesn't have that issue at all of stereotypes and politicians. But speaking of the South, though, what are some of your favorite aspects of being from the South? You know, what are some things that you think folks from outside the region should know about the South?
You know, I love the South. There are things about the South that I think maybe people, it's not that they don't know them, they don't appreciate them as much. But, you know, the beauty of the South is really amazing. It is not always as majestic as the Rocky Mountains or something like that. But to drive through Alabama, to drive through Georgia, drive through South Carolina, and the different terrains and the foothills of the Appalachians and by the big lakes and the rivers and the woods and things, that it's just remarkable. The farmland is so pretty. And I don't think folks can appreciate the value of just the natural beauty of the South, from the beaches in the Gulf, which I'm just call it the Gulf these days. You know, I don't want Pam Bondi to come arrest me for calling it anything else. You know, all the way to the mountains in the north. It's just a remarkable place. And I love to hunt, I love to fish, and it is an incredible place for outdoor recreation. The food is unbelievable in the South. But I've always said, and it's been so frustrating for me over the years to watch all these damn fools with Confederate flags telling people, well, that's our heritage. That's who we are in the South. Well, it's not. Our heritage is community. It's doing things for each other, being there for family, for community, for friends. There is a friendliness so much, there's a community so much in the South that you really have to live it to understand it, sometimes to tolerate it, because it's not perfect. But I wish people could see people for themselves as opposed to coming in, because I think the view so many times, or as you alluded to, there is this perception from the old South that creates a bias. And that included, by the way, back years ago when the damn sports writers were biased against Alabama when they would vote for national champions, okay? I'm just saying.
That's a good conversation for another time.
That's a good big turn. So.
I've been waiting for that one, boys. I'm going to tell you.
You've talked a bit about what is inspiring you to run for office again. Well, how do you feel that your lifetime experiences, your professional experiences, can help you positively impact the future for both Alabama and for the South?
Yeah, that's another really good question, because I think, look, I've loved over the years being a lawyer, even though my family will tell me that I cross-examine them too much and I don't listen enough. But actually, I think good trial lawyers do listen a lot. And that is, I think, going to be the key right now, not just in the campaign, but I think it's a key to governing. And I don't think enough political leaders today listen enough. They talk. They have more monologues than they do dialogues, and they don't listen enough. And I think the lawyer, my legal career has just been all over the place. I've been a prosecutor, I've been a defense lawyer, I was a prosecutor again, then a defense lawyer. I've done civil work, I've done civil defense work. I've been on just about every side of a courtroom except on the bench, which I never really wanted to do. And that gives you the experience that I think really helps guide whatever you do in life. I'd been in the defense world. I'd been a federal prosecutor and assistant U.S. attorney, then went into private practice for 13 years. And I was a criminal defense lawyer. And I was having some success. I was known around, I was getting good business in, but then this opportunity to be the U.S. attorney and go back to the other side as a prosecutor. And I had a client in Arizona that I went to visit. We were to wind some stuff up this was like a month before I was going to get nominated. And I went out there, and when I was going to fly back from there to Washington, D.C., and I got on, it was the last time I got to fly first class for a while, okay? And I got on the plane, and the seat next to me was vacant, and the stewardess, when we got up, said, "Do you mind if somebody sits here so that a husband and wife can sit?" And I said, "Sure." Well, it was Sandra Day O'Connor, Justice Sandra Day O'Connor. And she had a big old briefcase, of work. And she was so nice, and she was just so cordial. And we just had this amazing conversation. And when I told her what I was doing, I said, "What's interesting, Your Honor, is that I've been a pretty prominent criminal defense lawyer for 13 years. And now I'm going to hit the other side and be the federal prosecutor." And she kind of lit up and said, "You know what? I have been advocating that for so long. If we could get more public defenders, federal defenders, to swap jobs with assistant U.S. attorneys and stand in their shoes for a little bit, it would do more to help the criminal justice system than any law, anything we can do on the court, or anything that somebody could teach." And I think she's right. And that's been my approach to public service as well, to use whatever experience I can draw on and learn as much as I can. And it's served me okay.
And in all those years, going back and forth, all the jobs that you've had, what would you say are the 2 or 3 biggest changes that you've seen in the South that are important?
Certainly, I think race relations over my life have changed. I fear that we're taking a wrong turn sometimes. but it certainly changed. I mean, remember, if you were born at the same time of Brown versus Board of Education, you didn't have black politicians in the South. Folks couldn't even vote, much less hold office. So I think race relations and our public officials, just the face of our public officials, has made a dramatic change and a dramatic difference. I do worry about where things are headed right now. We may see the Voting Rights Act go away pretty soon, which is going to alter this entire country in a bad way if we're not careful. That has probably been the most significant. And sometimes that is not, it's laws, obviously, but we also had hearts and minds that changed as well. And that's the real key. It doesn't matter how many laws you change if you don't change somebody's perception of the other race, the other side, the people living on the other side of the tracks. And now that has grown. It's not just a black and white issue anymore. It's Hispanics, it's LGBTQ, it's disabled. You name it. There are now a much bigger focus on trying to be equal, and that we've still got a long way to go. I think that's certainly been the biggest, but I've also seen with that change has come economic progress in so many areas. Right here in Charlotte, it's an amazing city to me. Charlotte is an absolutely amazing city. The Research Triangle in North Carolina, amazing places. We've got places in the South now that I don't think people fully ever dreamed would be where they are. In part, I think in large part, because of the change in race relations, and people saw the South in a different way and a much more welcoming place, and saw that heritage that I was talking about come through. I think that's the biggest. There's all kinds of things I see, but I worry about the future a little bit because I'm concerned of the voting patterns right now that are going to roll back some of those rights. And when they roll back rights, you're going to roll back progress.
Every time we have a guest on our podcast, we always ask them the same question. What does the phrase "the New South" mean to you? And I am particularly intrigued to hear your answer because as you've talked about this evening, you have seen so much of this history, albeit you're only 40 years old.
Yeah.
But you've seen so much of this history in Alabama on a regional level and a national level too. So when you hear that phrase, "the New South," what does that mean to you in particular?
I've got to put this in the context of where the era I was born into and the era that changed and as I grew up. And the New South to me is, when I think of the New South, I don't think of the economy. I don't think of these big buildings and the skyscrapers we've seen. I don't think of the transportation hubs, the ports. I don't think of the educational opportunities with some amazing universities throughout the South. I think of leaders. I think of people, the New South leaders. It was the leadership in the South post Jim Crow, because for so long after, for instance, Brown versus Board, the leadership in the South primarily tried to stop all the civil rights. They voted against the Civil Rights Act. They voted against the Voting Rights Act. Strom Thurmond from South Carolina filibustered the Civil Rights Act for a gazillion days. It was an obstructionist view, Wallace standing in the schoolhouse door. But then when those laws got passed, you saw a new leadership begin to emerge in the South. And that's when I came of age, politically, so to speak, watching folks like Terry Sanford from North Carolina and Jim Hunt from North Carolina and, Bob Graham and Reuben Askew from Florida, my old boss, Howell Heflin, who looked like a Southern stereotype, more like Foghorn Leghorn for folks that remember that cartoon character. But he was a progressive Democrat at the time. And so I think of the leadership to make the changes that we just discussed. They were the leaders that said, we're going to put that behind us. We're going to give economic and educational opportunities for all people. And that's, to me, what the New South means. it needs to make sure we get it revived a little bit. And, you talked about my book. I would love one day to write a book just highlighting those new South leaders. I just think they're a fascinating group of people. And that's how I came of age. Dale Bumpers, I could go on and on, from Arkansas and David Pryor. They are just my heroes. They are truly my heroes and inspiration for so much that I've done.
And the South has produced so many great people, so many great leaders. And I often marvel at the fact that Birmingham itself has produced the great poet Sonia Sanchez, the great activist Angela Davis, and the brilliant Condoleezza Rice, who moved into a part of government and maybe politics that not everyone agrees with, but nonetheless, 3 giants is really remarkable. One more thing.
Don't forget Willie Mays.
Of course. You got a long list.
I got a long list.
I'll ask you about Kenny Stabler and Joe Namath later.
Okay.
As you hope for the future of the South, what would you change? What would you keep the same? And what outcomes would you like to see for the new generation of young Southerners?
Right now, what I hope for the younger generation is to get more engaged. Things moved and we were making progress, and then things all of a sudden started moving backwards a little bit. And so many of our young folks got disengaged. They didn't think votes mattered as much. They didn't get civically engaged. They got distracted with their phones and other things. And not being critical, I think any one of us would have probably been the same way in their age. But I'm hoping that they will get more engaged. I hope that they will get very engaged, because with AI coming, with other things happening, this future is going to ride on their shoulders. And they've got to learn to deal with it. And that means getting out of the political corners. Whether your parents and your grandparents voted Republican or whether they voted Democrat all their life, they need to get out of their political corners. And they need to start talking about to political leaders and candidates about, tell me what you are going to do for the future of this community. Tell me what you're going to do for my family. All politics is personal. And I don't mean that in a selfish way. But all politics needs to be personal. Everybody needs to be asking that question. So the thing that I'd like to see change right now is to get those young folks engaged, to make sure the progress that has been made in the South accelerates. Because there are places where it's still moving kind of good, but progress in the South is more than just bringing in businesses. If you're not paying a good wage and the money's not going down to the workers that are making those manufacturing, places run and operate at capacity and profits, then it ain't really helping anybody except the folks in the corporate boardroom. We've got to make sure that our kids are trained, they're educated, and that's what I want to see. And I think right now, we've got some challenges going forward on all of those, and I think it's up to us to try to help lead the way and open those doors.
It is always amazing to me where this country sits among the rest of the world in terms of voter participation. And it really does start with youth, to be inculcated that that's so important to maintaining a democracy.
Still one of the lowest participation rates in the free world. The United States of America has been the leader of the free world since World War II. But yet we still lag behind in true democracy in many, many ways. And we need to get folks engaged. We need to convince them early on at the local level. It ain't just the president or a U.S. senator or a governor. It is at the school board. It is that the local leaders. It's where rubber meets the road right here in these local elections. Grab an issue. Grab something you care about. Do something. Talk to people. Get engaged. Organize. There's still a place for that.
Well, we're going to get some questions answered right now. You want to get engaged. We're going to get your answers to some very critical questions that we have, usually for all of our guests.
Okay.
Robert?
All right, so I'll start first. What is your favorite place to be in the South?
Favorite place to be?
Yes.
In a deer stand.
Okay.
Okay, I mean, look, I love, my life has been so hectic. There is nothing like getting out in the woods. Deer very rarely get injured when I go hunting, okay? But just to be out there and to see and to watch and get away, I love it. And if I'm not there, I'm on a fishing boat. I mean, I really mean that. I love to get out. Sweet tea or Arnold Palmer? Yeah. Depends on the location. Depends on the location and which Southern restaurant I'm in. Sometimes you go in and ask for an Arnold Palmer, and they go, what? But we always have sweet tea.
What is your favorite Southern word or phrase?
Bless their heart.
That's turning out to be a winner.
Could it be anything else, guys? I mean, really?
Who is your favorite Southerner, living or dead?
Oh, wow. Living or dead, favorite Southerner, living or dead, that would be tough. I mean, that's really tough. If right off the top of my head, the person that comes to mind would be somebody like Jimmy Carter. Okay? I mean, I really...
Can't go wrong there.
I can't go wrong there. I mean, he just was an inspiration to so many people, even though his presidency ended too early. But that comes to mind. I mean, as much as anything. There's, look, we've had, Martin Luther King was a Southerner. Okay, Ralph Abernathy was a Southerner. We've had some amazing leaders in the South that I don't think get the credit they deserve sometimes for being from the South. So, but, a New South governor and president.
Perhaps our most controversial question of all.
Ooh, this one's tough.
What is the most underrated Southern food?
Underrated Southern food. Wow. Probably my wife's deviled eggs.
Okay, all right.
They're amazing, but they're underrated because they're just part of a big spread, and they're deviled eggs. And who the hell would know when you just look at a deviled egg? And I kept saying, try them. Oh, don't try them. I'll take them. So.
And this one's just for you. I had voted for Joe Namath or Ken Stabler as the greatest Alabama quarterback. But who's your favorite Southern governor, past or present?
Well, Carter have to be up there, but I think, look, I'm not sure I can give you one. I think you've got Dale Bumpers over in Arkansas. I think you've got Reuben Askew and Bob Graham down in Florida. I think you've got Jim Hunt here. I mean, there are some, it's that whole New South governors that were my favorite governors.
And what do you think defines them as New South governors?
I think it's they're coming literally the generation right after Jim Crow, and their ability to reach across racial lines, not to be afraid to seek the black vote. And when they got in office, act on it, appointing boards. That's, Carter just broke barrier after barrier as both governor and as president in appointing black judges and appointing black folks to the cabinet and the administration. To me, when you have leaders that are willing to take that step and step out and act on that courage, you know that it means more, that to them, it's more about humanity, and it's more about progress, and it's more about the entire community than their own dang political career. And that we don't have enough profiles and courage like that in the country anymore. And we need those kind of New South governors, even if it's on different issues. We still need them. And that's what, it goes back to that.
Doug Jones, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you.
On behalf of the Levine Museum of the New South, Next Chapter Podcast, those of us with our New South podcast team, we want to say thank you very much to Doug Jones, the Carolina Theater for hosting us, and to all of you for being such a great audience. Thank you very much. Good night.
Night, everybody. Thank you.
Wow, Kevin, that was quite the interview. I think Doug Jones had a lot to say about so many topics we've been talking about this entire season and really for the entire series run of Our New South. But this conversation was fantastic.
Yeah, it was. It was great to do it before a live audience, to get that interaction, get that energy. And I've got to say, it was really great just to talk to Doug Jones, not as a political candidate, not as a former senator, but just as a son of the South. And to hear him reflect on the time he was born, which was an old South, if you will, that was becoming, at that time, a new South. Really the birth of the civil rights movement in the South, and how that shaped and formed him to become the person that he is today.
And, I have to say, it was refreshing to hear from someone like Doug Jones how he himself experienced the civil rights movement,
right,
the post-civil rights era in the South. That's a history that we're still really digging into now, but less so about the activists or the politicians and more about the regular folks like a young Doug Jones who, at the time, really just wanted to play for the New York Yankees.
Exactly. But fortunately for all of us, he became an outstanding civil rights lawyer who brought justice to those who had perpetrated violence against people of color in this country. Thank goodness for that. And it just as a reminder also, I think that the South also had some folks not of color who worked on behalf of all, and in fact, in the spirit of other people in the South. And the fact that, I thought it was interesting that Doug Jones pointed out that he grew up on the edges of everything that was happening, right? But he becomes immersed in everything that was happening, and that really formed the Doug Jones that we've come to know.
I really can't think of anyone who better embodies the spirit of multiple New Souths than Doug Jones, to go from being very much part of white Alabama to being a champion of all Alabamans and all Southerners. I think Doug Jones' life and story is a really impressive one, and one that should be inspiring to many.
Absolutely. And did he give us one Roll Tide?
Thanks, Kevin. You had to get it in there, didn't you? You just had to say that.
Now, Robert, let's give the people the answer to that trivia question.
Here's the question again. In the civil rights era, who is considered the first New South governor? A. Reuben Askew of Florida, B. Bill Waller, Mississippi, C. Terry Sanford, North Carolina, or D. George Wallace of Alabama? The answer is C. Terry Sanford of North Carolina.
Didn't know that, but Terry Sanford was elected governor of North Carolina in 1960 and served from 1961 to 1965. He defeated his segregationist opponent, I. Beverly Lake Sr., in the Democratic primary, focusing on economic opportunity and improving education. Other New South governors would cite him as a pioneer.
You know what I'm saying? It's like we got a demo tape and don't nobody want to hear it, but it's like this is South got something to say.
Our New South is presented by Levine Museum of the New South. Levine Museum connects the past to the future to realize the promises of a New South. To learn more and donate to projects like this, visit museumoftheNewSouth.org.
Our New South is produced by Next Chapter Podcast. Thanks to our audio editor, sound designer, and composer, Cal Murdoch, video editor, Justin Cortez, producers Brian Douglas, Alexander Pineras, and Cliff Whitfield, senior producer and writer Byron Hunter, and executive producers Jeremiah Tittle and Frankie Abbott. Please follow the show, subscribe, rate and review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and watch portions of our interviews on YouTube.
Go to youtube.com and search Levine Museum.
Learn more at nextchapterpodcast.com/Our New South.
South got something to say.
Thanks for listening.
Right now, we are living through some of the most tumultuous political times our country has ever known. I'm David Remnick, and each week on the New Yorker Radio Hour, I'll try to make sense of what's happening, alongside politicians and thinkers like Cory Booker, Nancy Pelosi, Liz Cheney, Tim Walz, Ketanji Brown Jackson, Newt Gingrich, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., Charlemagne the God, and so many more. That's all in the New Yorker Radio Hour, wherever you listen to podcasts.
Next Chapter Podcasts.